Brianna Ladapo is a woman who has made it her life's mission to make this world a better place. Last time she was on the show, we talked about the incredible work she does with survivors of human trafficking. Today, though, we are talking about her truly inspirational book, Emerging from Darkness. It is the very raw story about growing up in an abusive household, and rather than fall into the cycle of more abuse, she is the one in her family to finally break those generational trauma bonds and free not only herself, but all of her future descendants. Brianna, welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here.
I'm so happy to have you back and be able to have this conversation, because last time when we talked, it was such a heavy topic, even though the work that you do with those survivors of human trafficking is a beautiful gift, and it's uplifting, and it's helping these people step into a world that was terrifying and making it a better place and giving them comfort and joy and bringing smiles back to their faces. It's still a very heavy topic. Whereas this book, I read this in one sitting. So just anyone who doesn't already have a copy, this is it. I could not put it down.
Thank you. I'm delighted to hear that.
So the book talks about your life growing up and adapting to life, I guess, when you were suffering from abuse and there was a lot of trauma and things that went on. But it's much more about your spiritual development and the process that you went through to break those trauma bonds, to grow as a spirit and as a soul and transcend all of what you endured when you were younger. Is that a correct take on this?
Absolutely. Yes. I really only tell my story for the purpose of demonstrating to people how I got onto the other side of the trauma, because at this point, I feel like most of our world, if not all, is made up of walking wounded. We all not only have our own trauma that we experience in our lifetimes, but I think a lot of people don't realize we bring the baggage of multiple generations before us right onto earth with us. Some call it intergenerational trauma, but it's a very real thing. What your ancestral lines have experienced actually has the power to change your genetics. Epigenetics is an incredible, really fascinating field of study. And it has shown us scientifically that things that happen can actually change your DNA. And without some kind of intervention, we just pay that forward to every generation that comes after us. So I wanted to show people that it really is possible to transmute your trauma and step back into who you really are and who you really came into this world to be. Because frankly, that's who we need everyone to be. We're not going to get out of the situation we found ourselves in until people really step into their power and are able to be fully expressed in who they actually are.
And do you think people, or many people, have the realization that we are often reliving the cycles that our grandmothers and our great-grandmothers lived before us, even though we don't necessarily know their story all the time?
Not as often as I'd like. I do think that's becoming more an accepted topic of conversation. I remember growing up in my house, though this may not be the best bar by which to judge, because this was not an okay thing to talk about, but things like reincarnation and generational trauma and anything in that realm were considered total nonsense, fairy tales, excuses even for weakness. So I am happy to say that the conversation has changed pretty radically in the last 30 some odd years. But it's shocking how often I meet people. In fact, this happened yesterday. I met a wonderful person who came to me for help and had no idea what the source of her great anxiety was. She thought that it might have been COVID and the lockdowns. And of course, that was a very anxiety-provoking event for everyone. But of course, her trauma actually predated that by many, many years and had started early in her childhood. And she told me at the end of our conversation that it had never even occurred to her that she was carrying around old wounds. And those wounds are just things that happened to her specifically, not even what happened to her mother and her grandmother. It turned out there was quite a lot of sexual trauma in her ancestry, as there was in mine. So I think it's becoming a more accepted idea, but we do have some work to go. We have a long way to go.
In the book, you talk about gifts that you had from childhood. What specifically are those gifts?
Well, the primary ones that I remember essentially being born with, that I never knew not having them, were visions. I used to think they were dreams when I was a little girl. I didn't realize they were visions until they started coming true. And then I would talk to my angels just like I'm talking to you right now. I could always hear them. I knew they were always with me. And, as a child, you define the world through your own experience. So I had no idea this was weird. I did not know this was considered unusual and that my extremely religious family might not be thrilled to hear that I was talking to people they couldn't see. So when I openly shared this with them, it did not go well. But those gifts, they saved my life many times as a child and continue to this day. And there are others, but I can read people's energy. I see people's energy and auras in color, and it immediately gives me information about who they are at a soul level, what they're dealing with at a human level, what kinds of trauma they have that need to be transmuted. But I used to think they were curses. I have finally come to regard them as gifts, but that took some years.
And how did the gifts help you as you were on this journey of healing yourself?
Well, I sort of shot myself in the foot because I turned them off for many years. Early on, as a child, as I said, they did save my life a few times, but at the time, I really didn't understand enough about them to know that's what was happening, because, I have that happening in one ear, and then in my other ear, I have my deeply religious and dogmatic family telling me that that's not possible. You couldn't be experiencing that because that doesn't happen. That doesn't exist. And as a kid, it's difficult to balance that, right? I mean, your family is supposed to be the group of people who love you unconditionally and accept you for who you are. So when they started telling me, you can't be having this experience because that is not a thing, that is not real, I believed them. And so I shut all that down for a while. And it took many, many years for me to turn it back on. I go through that journey in my book. But when I finally realized many years later, I was in my 20s, by the time I finally realized that these gifts were not only real, but they were absolutely crucial to me being the person that I actually was and accomplishing what I came to Earth to accomplish. I've learned the hard way that you cannot fulfill your soul's desires, your soul contract. You cannot help other people. You can't even help yourself if you do not first fully accept and step into who you actually are at a soul level. I feel like I lost track of the question. I'm sorry.
No, I
Sorry, I
love
was going somewhere with that.
No, I love that answer. It was how have your gifts served you while going through this evolution of soul, essentially?
Thank you. The other thing I wanted to say is that now, being so far on the other side of it, where I have accepted that the gifts are not only real, but actually are a gift and not a curse, as I had sadly believed for much of my childhood. Now I have learned to trust my gut completely. And I think that sounds like it may not mean much or may sound cliche, but truly, that is the one piece of advice. If I could only tell people one thing, it would be to always honor your intuition, because we actually already know everything we need to know. We know what is right for us. We know what resonates, what is best for us, what is going to serve our highest, greatest good, and by proxy, that of everyone else in our lives. But we live in a world and in a culture that tells us we need outside external sources to tell us what is right, what we need, right? What we should eat, what we need to buy, what we should believe, all of it. And so we've gotten a little bit spiritually lazy and accustomed to standing behind someone else's example, when the truth is, you'll never be able to find a better answer to what you need outside yourself than just by looking inward. So my intuition it's solely responsible for landing me where I am today, because even meeting the healer that I ultimately met that helped change the journey completely for my husband and I, the only reason I met him is because my intuition led me through a series of interactions. And then when I ultimately ended up with his book and saw him on the cover and had an incredibly deep soul resonance with this person that I had never seen before, I wouldn't even be sitting here. There would be no book to talk about.
I had a therapist that had a similar impact on my life, and I interviewed her. Sadly, she passed away in 2019. But finding the right therapist is everything. And my woman, when I went to see her, I knew she was the one because she got me. There was a connection. But one of the biggest lessons that she taught me was we are responsible for everything that happens in our lives. And this is something that you talk about in the book, which I loved because I've said this to people and it can be quite a confronting idea. And it made me reflect back on the first time that I ever heard that being said to me. And I ended up cursing at this woman. And I said, how dare you? Do you think I asked for all of these things? And I stormed out of that room. I was not having that conversation because I wasn't responsible for anything. And I had to call her a few days later with my tail between my legs and apologize for my inappropriate outburst and explained why it was so offensive. And she said, now can I explain what I mean? And I said, sure. And her explanation to me was, these things happen to you because you don't believe that you deserve anything different. This is what you right now are telling yourself that you deserve. And so that is the situations that you create for yourself. And she said, but by recognizing that and understanding why these things happened and why choices were made, and it's not that we consciously go out and ask for traumas to happen, it's something much deeper. But once you understand why you are asking for that, you then have the power to change everything else that happens moving forward. And when she explained that, a light bulb went off and I went, okay, can I please come back and see you? And she was so gracious. And I have a feeling I'm not the first person to have gotten angry at her for saying such a thing. And I don't know how many people go back. But first of all, was that idea as confronting for you as it was for me?
Absolutely. I had a similar reaction. So I was sitting with Christopher, who is the healer I described in the book, and we were on the topic of sexual assault. And I share this openly in the book as well. I have a long history of sexual assault. And I think it's also widely known that with rape victims, very often they end up being re-victimized. And science has their explanation for this, of course, but I have a very different take on that now. And so he more or less told me the same thing that your therapist told you. He put it a little differently. He said, you co-create every experience you ever have in your life. And my initial reaction was something I should not say on the air, but I was not happy about it. I was thinking, how dare you insinuate that I wanted this, that I asked for this. I heard media in my head about victim blaming, and I was really getting on my high horse about it. But then I had to take a breather. I had to go eat some lunch and calm down. And then I realized what he was actually saying. It's very much what you just said. So first, if we can accept the idea that we are responsible for everything we experience in our lives, that also means that if we're not happy with it, we have the power to change it and create what we do want, which is incredible. Now, as you said, it is very confronting for people to accept the idea that they had anything to do with their own trauma, because it's not as if we're consciously out there saying, yes, please assault me, please take advantage of me, please hurt me. No one, well, I hope no one consciously wants that to occur. But it's so much more complicated than that, right? Not only do our own experiences on the earth plane generate a certain frequency that we hold, and it's like a beacon, right? It's like a light inside you that emits a certain type of energy, and it's attracting the same type of energy. So if you have experienced a lot of sexual assault. And actually, I'll just use myself as an example. I was basically a lighthouse blaring the message of open for business, please abuse me. And really, that was my soul trying to work out and make sense of what had happened to me so many times. But it was even more than that. I come from a long line of women who have experienced sexual trauma, a very long line of women. So I actually came in, I was born with that energy running through me. And then I added my own experiences on top of it. And that makes you, or me rather, a beacon for having this experience again and again and again until you're able to finally unpack and transmute the energy that's creating that signal. And in fact, if you don't mind, I'd love to tell one quick story that
Please.
illustrates. So, and this happened the very first day that I went to see Christopher. So I'm in my ride share heading over, very excited because my husband had such an amazing experience that I couldn't wait to see what was possible for me. And his office was on the beach in LA. And I'm pulling up, looking at the addresses on all these lovely homes, and I don't see the one I'm looking for. And I finally realized that his house must be the one under construction, covered in scaffolding. And I see a whole crew of construction workers out front, and my heart just drops. I think, oh my God, I have to walk through these men to get to the front door. And as every woman who has ever lived will tell you, that's a hideous experience. And I had one experience like that in the past that had gone particularly horribly. And so I really did not want to do this. And there was one guy who was especially vulgar and just really getting in my face and trying to physically prevent me from getting to the door. So anyway, we'll fast forward through all that. I put my head down, headed into the building, and went up to see Christopher. And so one of the very first things we started unpacking was sexual assault trauma, because he basically said, why are you here? What are we doing? And after I started talking to him and he saw that I had quite the lineage of this type of energy, he said, okay, the first thing we have to do is transmute that frequency. So you're no longer acting like a beacon and attracting it to you. And that, of course, is when I got angry. But so we'll fast forward. So after a couple hours of working through some of this, he sent me out to go to lunch. So I walked down the hall and called the elevator, and it opened up. And who is in the elevator but the exact same guy who had been so disgusting and had tried to block me from getting into the building? And my first thought was, run for the stairs. And I thought, no, I'm terrified, but I'm not going to be displaced by this person. So I got into the elevator. This guy looks at the floor as if he's never seen me before in his life. He mutters in a very tiny voice, excuse me, ma'am, I hope you don't mind my saying so, but you look very beautiful today. And I thought, what? Do you not remember 2 hours ago when you were saying things that shouldn't even be uttered in bars? And I was very confused. And he didn't say anything the rest of the ride. And he's staring at the floor. He won't even look at me. And that was not an issue earlier that morning. So I can't figure this out. So finally, we get down to the first floor and he says, have a beautiful day, and walks out. And I'm thinking, all right, thank you. So I walk out and I have to walk through the other guys too. No one whistles, hollers, cat calls, nothing. They're silent. I thought maybe I've wandered into a parallel universe. So, and at this point, I'm saying this to myself in jest because it's weird, but I don't have an explanation. So I walk down the street, and the area he lives in is kind of a beachy resort area. So there was a big group of young, it looked like 20-something frat guys who were very day drunk, having a great time, causing a ruckus, but I had to walk through these guys. And so, of course, I had the same reaction thinking, oh God, is there any way around? So I walked through the middle of them, and to my great surprise, they were perfect gentlemen. They parted like the Red Sea and let me walk through. One of them literally tipped his hat to me. Huh. And I was so surprised, actually, I dropped my purse, and one of them swooped in, grabbed it, picked it up, and handed it to me. Here you go, ma'am. Nothing inappropriate, nothing remotely suggestive. And this had never happened to me before. Of course, now in retrospect, I understand why, but I was stunned. And throughout the course of my lunch hour, I had 2 more experiences just like this. So when I finally got back to Christopher, I said, all right, what did you do to me? what's going on? And he's asking me about, so how was your lunch, with a twinkle in his eye, like he knows something happened. And I found out later, he sent me out on purpose so that I could experience the way the outside world would interact with my energy now that that sexual trauma frequency was gone. So when I said, what did you do? He said, we transmuted that frequency. So you no longer radiate sexual trauma. You're not going to attract it anymore. And I really didn't get it until that moment.
It was one of the most transformational things for me to understand that I had the power to decide what sort of life I have, what sort of interactions I have. And it's a really difficult thing to explain. And I think you just did it so eloquently in showing people what we mean when we say things like that. People would always call me and say, how do you have the energy that you have? How do you move through life the way that you do? And I used to direct people to go and see Ida, and a lot of them would go and do it. Some of them would just refuse because they didn't want to do therapy. And I said, it is the greatest gift you will ever give yourself. And I would always say, Ida is a little left of center. She's not for everyone, and you have to find the right therapist for you. So you've got to find that person that you do resonate with. But a lot of people would go and they would leave it after one session and say, that was the most incredible couple of hours of my life. But often they wouldn't go back because I think it was too much. And there's a lot of people that aren't sort of ready for that, which brings me to my next question. Certainly in my world, we hear a lot talked about in terms of shadow work. And we've got to do the shadow work to get through to the other side. And in doing the shadow work, it's transmuting all of that trauma and the darkness into something more positive. But there are a lot of people that will talk about how they're doing light work, but they don't want to do the shadow work. And so they believe that by bringing in enough light, that will just drown out the darkness. Have you encountered that yourself when you're speaking to people?
More often than I would like. Yes. And I feel like social media, influencers, and other forms of media have really played a role in this misconception that if we just bury ourselves in the light, it's like burying your head in the sand in a way, that the darkness will just disappear. But I'm afraid it does not work that way. There is no easy path through soul work. You absolutely have to address the shadow, because the thing is, for each of us, we each have our own version of trauma. We've each had our own experience. We're each on our own journey. We have different ancestors, which means we have different energetic baggage. So there is no one easy way to fix all of this. And like you said, there's not even one practitioner or one way of practicing. You really do have to find what it is your soul needs, whether it's a person, a practice, or whatever it is. But no, there's absolutely no way around doing the shadow work. And personally, I think it's more important to focus on doing the shadow work, because when you clear away the shadow, the light naturally fills that void. So you're really working too hard if you're solely focusing on bringing in this light, because the truth is, if you have shadow present, and we all do, this is certainly not a criticism, it's just a fact, where there is shadow, light cannot coexist. So you have to clear that out to make room for the light. So even if someone is not necessarily ready to jump in with both feet, that's my style. If I know there's a problem, I like to just get it done, solve it. That's that. But not everyone feels that way. And so for those for whom this idea of taking on the shadow is a little bit too much, it's best just to start with baby steps. Start somewhere you're comfortable. I always recommend that people try a tiny bit of meditation. Even if that sounds like a crazy word, or if you grew up in a family like mine where that sounds like nonsense, sitting outside in your favorite place with your feet in the dirt or the sand, leaning up against a tree, being in nature and letting the sun shine on your face for 5 minutes will benefit you. That will start to get you in touch with your higher self and your inner soul. And that silence will let you hear the voice inside of you that's going to tell you what you need to do. So even if it sounds terrifying, just do one tiny thing every day, just to open yourself to the possibility of starting to be able to grapple with it. And in the perfect, correct, divine timing for you, you'll find your way. I truly believe that.
And I also think that there is a freedom when you start doing the shadow work. It can be incredibly confronting when you first step into it, because we're facing all of the things we don't like about ourselves or that are uncomfortable that have happened in our lives. And I get revisiting trauma is difficult. But as you do the work, what a lot of people don't realize because they're afraid to step into it, when you start doing it and you're transmuting all of that, there is a freedom on the other side, because you're free of that weight and the heaviness that comes with carrying all of that around. And when you're able to move freely without all of that holding you back, it changes how you're able to live your life moving forward. With that being said, though, I think there are memes out there that say what I thought doing the light work would, or walking the light path would be like, and it's all sunshine and unicorns and rainbows and all these beautiful things. And then they say, but what it's actually like, and there is a woman that has been through a war, she is disheveled, she is dirty, and she's got a cigarette hanging out her mouth, but she's survived. And I feel that's an accurate depiction of what the shadow work is, or what it can feel like.
Oh, yeah. I mean, in my book, I dictate what I now fondly, since it's been a while, call my dark night of the soul, which is the night that I experienced after the first time we did a major session of transmutation. And oh my goodness, I won't I won't get fully into it at the moment, but it was the most violently ill, painful night of my life. And I didn't realize until much later, because I felt like I was dying, actually. And I realized a part of me did die. My old ego self, the part that was forged in trauma, the parts of me that weren't even me, that I had carried through from my ancestry, I didn't need any of it. And it was affecting the way that I interacted with every person in every part of my life, and it had since birth. And so I find that night I did shed that part of myself. But yeah, it's not a pretty process. It can be very intense, it can be very difficult. But the amazing thing about transmutation is that while intense, it is also permanent. It's instantaneous, incredibly profound, and permanent. And that was a new idea for me, because I had tried just about everything I could get my hands on before, including traditional therapy and programs like Landmark and Avatar. So I had done a lot of these things, and I feel like I got something out of every experience I had, absolutely. But it was all one tiny piece of the puzzle. And though it did a lot to bring things to the surface for me, it didn't do much to actually resolve them. So I feel like, great, now I know more of what's going on with me, but it's still all sitting here on the surface. And now I'm carrying such heavy baggage. What do I do with all of this? But it never went anywhere. So I had started to believe that, well, we're just destined to walk the earth forever, carrying all of this baggage. But transmutation is a completely different experience. You can actually remove this from your life. And I think I spent the first 6 months after I first learned how to do this, waiting for the other shoe to drop and thinking, okay, it's going to come back. Like this amazing feeling of freedom that this isn't going to last. This is too good to be true. It's going to come back. And the same thing happened to my husband for months. I feel like we were kind of waiting with bated breath because we were so afraid this amazing feeling was going to end, but it doesn't. It only gets better, but only if you tackle the shadow work.
I agree completely. So you talked about how meditation, if people start with meditation and just start listening to themselves, ground themselves and connect to the universe in a really sort of wholesome and all-consuming way, just doing that can change how things work. But you also talk about choosing gratitude over fear, trusting your intuition, being selective about who we have in our lives, you know, choosing people that are higher vibrational versus being lower vibrational beings, those negative people that, you know, want, and I'm not saying drinking alcohol at all is bad, but people that are drinking heavily or involved in drugs, it changes the vibration that we're operating at. Consuming consciously, so being aware what we're putting into our bodies and taking care of ourselves, you know, choosing whole foods over processed foods, practicing self-love, and then getting to the stage where the shadow work sort of needs to be done. But I think when you get there, especially if you've put all these other things in place, you're ready for the shadow work when you get there. You almost can't get there fast enough. Do you think that each of those things, even individually, make a difference for people and get them a little bit closer to being able to be in a place to transmute all of that trauma and those bonds that they have?
Absolutely. Every little thing that you do for yourself, including the whole list of things that you just mentioned, whether it's taking even 2 minutes of meditation, whether it's making a positive choice about someone who you might love but is definitely not serving you in your life, whether it's making the choice to put some distance there, whether it is choosing to watch something uplifting instead of a slasher movie. All of those things raise your vibration. And I'm not passing judgment on slasher movies or people who aren't necessarily a great fit or any of these things. It's not even about good or bad, because honestly, I find those to be human constructs. It's really not about good or bad. It's about what kind of outcome do you want? Because everything that we do, everything we take in, whether it's something that we eat or drink, something that we watch or listen to, everything that we take in has a vibration and will affect ours. It's impossible to avoid. So it's just about being mindful about the experience you want to have. So if you allow all of these low vibrational things into your body, your mind, and your spirit, you will ultimately you will attract lower vibrational experiences. It's like frequency that I was talking about earlier. My sexual trauma frequency was blasting to the world. This is the experience I want to have. So I kept on having it. And when I was able to change that, now I haven't had so much as one inappropriate comment in years as a result. So it's just about deciding what you want your life to look like. What do you want to experience? What do you want to feel? And then making decisions about consumption or activity or people in your life that are aligned with that vibration. And honestly, the higher your vibration gets, the easier life is. And in my experience, the more work you do to raise your vibration, the easier it is to take on the shadow. Like you said, you almost can't wait, because when your vibration starts to rise, things that are lower vibration, things of the darkness, things that do not resonate for you start to fall away naturally. You gain incredible clarity, incredible peace, and neutrality. And this one took me a long time, but being able to be in neutrality, which is being able to observe or be in a situation without adding anything and without subtracting anything. You don't feel the need to change it or fix it. You can just accept that this is the experience. Say it's, you know, someone in your life or someone on TV. You can say, this is the experience they are choosing to have, and not making it mean anything about you or your own experience. And it is the most freeing and empowering ability, and in a real way, not like, let's go to meditation class. And I love those. I'm not bagging those at all. But a lot of people are under the misconception that simply going to a class, and you know, whether you participate or not, whether you change your vibration or not, whether you actually settle into that alignment or not, thinking that that's going to change your vibration is not true. You actually have to show up with the intention to raise your vibration. But yes, every tiny thing that you do to raise your vibration will improve your life.
And I think the shedding of low vibrational people, I think when you want to raise your vibration, you automatically know who's not good for you, because you see them and you feel drained, or they're not kind. And you have these moments where you walk away and say, I don't feel good around these people. And especially as your vibration is raising, often these people will have a go at you and pick on you in some way, as if you're doing something weird or bad, because you're no longer vibrating with them. And if they are low vibrational, they don't want you to ascend, essentially. They want you to stay right where you are with them. And sometimes if their vibration is low enough, they want to keep you down there because they don't want these good things for you. And when you shed those people, they will often come for you and be nasty as you're moving away from them. But it's because they can feel that you're growing. And just that act alone of saying, I am done with this, is often enough to make you feel like the lightest person in the world.
Absolutely. The best piece of advice I've ever received was also the simplest, but it's so true. Someone said to me, look, if it feels good, it's for you. If it feels bad, keep walking.
Yeah.
And it's true. Back to your intuition being everything. Your gut will tell you everything you need to know. And like you said, the higher your vibration is, the clearer you are and the easier it is to pick up on all of that. So if something does drain you, if something makes you irritable or tired or uncomfortable, often that means keep walking. It's not for you.
In the book, you talk about how you met your husband, Joe. And I love this story for so many reasons. You're in a place in your life when you meet him where you've said, I am not getting married ever. You've come out of a relationship. You've been on a trip. You get on a flight. There is this handsome stranger that gets on. Somebody almost dies. The handsome stranger saves him. There is a flight diversion. There's a hurricane. You're in a crowded airport and you get separated. And, you know, you find each other again. And I'm not going into detail specifically because I want people to read this for themselves. I'm just giving the cliff notes. And then once you guys reconnect, you're separated by distance for some time. Do you understand that right there is a Hollywood movie just on its own?
I hear that sometimes. And it's funny because I lived it, and I was in such a dark place at the time that I'm not sure anything short of that would honestly have gotten my attention. So in retrospect, I think that was quite dramatic, universe. But I was in such a black hole. I probably would have missed it if it had not come flying at me with bells on like that.
And it really did. And I'd heard this story before I read it in your book, but every time it is as powerful for me as the first time I heard it. And so your husband, Joe, wrote his own book, which was released last year, and that was called Transcend Fear. And I have that here. It was another one that I read in a very short space of time. I think that one took me 2 days. The thing that I love, because having read both of these books, you both have your own story and your own journey. And he talks about his childhood. He talks about meeting you. He talks about going to see Christopher and why. And then he talks about being a doctor that went against the official narrative during COVID and his journey with all of that. But throughout his book and yours, you're both essentially telling the same story, obviously your own childhoods, but you're telling the same story. So for me, it was really interesting reading the same story through two different sets of eyes. And while they're a little bit different, because obviously things are colored with our own lens and our own view of things, they're very cohesive tellings of the same story, which often doesn't happen in relationships because people can be at polar opposite ends of the spectrum when telling things because of their experiences. Do you think that is in large part to the work that you have both done spiritually for yourselves?
Absolutely. Doing that kind of work and clearing away the shadow, transmuting trauma, and really getting clear about what you've been carrying that doesn't necessarily belong to you, that has been informing every interaction you have in your life. Getting clear about all of that, it really gives you an amazing freedom. When people are in a very emotional state, which of course is common with trauma and very understandable, it colors the way that you see everything else, colors the way you see the world, the people in it, yourself. Like we were talking earlier about feeling like we don't deserve anything better. And we're human, so we tell a lot of stories. We tell ourselves stories. We make up stories about what happened to either make it more comfortable, less comfortable, more dramatic, more believable, whatever it is, depending on what it is that we actually need. We tell other people's stories for the same reasons. It's, in my experience, it's usually a part of trying to find the power and significance that trauma has robbed you of, but it obscures the truth. And I'm not saying there's one version of the truth. Absolutely not. Everyone has their own experiences and their own journey, and we all have our own truth. But it certainly helps to strip away the shadow and the nonsense and the pain and all of the emotions wrapped up in our experiences. Because when you can do that, you can be in neutrality, right? And so even if your experience still differs a little bit from someone else's, you're probably going to get a whole lot closer to the truth of what actually occurred if you don't have all of this noisy interference in your head. So if Joe and I had written those books 5 years prior to when we did, first of all, sadly, we'd probably be divorced because we were in such a terrible place. And it really wasn't even between us. It was all of our respective trauma from our childhoods and our ancestry coming in to destroy the relationship that we had with each other. So if we had written them from that perspective, I doubt there'd be much alignment at all. It might be violent opposition, if anything. But on the other side of it, so many of the issues we had or thought we had, as it turns out, were just products of trauma. And some of it that didn't even have anything to do with us. Some of it was birthed generations before we were even born. So clearing that energy away gives you a powerful freedom and clarity.
I love that you've both gone on this spiritual journey and gotten to this point. Your husband, Dr. Joe Ladapo, is a man of science. And generally, people that come from that scientific background are not so much into the whole light worker, spiritual side of things because they're used to having data and facts in front of them that they can prove. So how has it worked? Because you guys are like this perfect ball of yin and yang where you balance each other out. But how has that worked in the relationship? Or was he always that spiritual being, or did you sort of bring that out of him?
Well, it works a lot better now that we've done this work for sure. It was challenging in the beginning, very much so, because like you said, he's a man of science and he came up in academia and went to amazing schools, did arguably the most amazing programs in the world, and was very much entrenched in that world. And I've always been deeply spiritual. I've always been having visions and talking to my angels on the polar opposite end of the spectrum. And I'm pretty sure for the first little while we were together, he thought I was crazy. It was rocky at first. We were so powerfully attracted to each other. And even though we were both really damaged when we met, really damaged, we could still see each other's souls. Like I could see the man that was in there. So I was never deterred, but it was tough, especially when it came to medical things where my gut would be saying, absolutely not. And he would say, but this is what the data says. And so it was rough. That was actually one of the factors that led to us to the brink of total collapse and implosion. However, as soon as he dealt with his trauma, he almost immediately, like literally within a couple of days, transformed into the person that I had always seen inside of him, the soul that I knew was in there, but very rarely came out to play. And all of a sudden, I was experiencing him as a deeply spiritual person. And I think he always had been. His soul was always there, but he was so congested, if you will, with everything that had happened to him. And after what happened to him as a child, he shut down completely. And the way he dealt with his stress was to disappear. So while his physical body would be right in front of me, emotionally and spiritually, he would vacate completely. His eyes would be glassy and dead. and there he would become completely unresponsive. And that was just his stress response. But once we got rid of that and the emotional trauma, I was blown away actually, but not only how present he was and how spiritual he really was, but how funny he was. He had been too traumatized to have any humor before. I never knew my husband was funny. And so now I love it. He makes me laugh. He laughs with our kids, and it's just so beautiful and angelic, and it makes my heart burst every time, because that wouldn't have been possible without this work. And I had my own version of that. I feel like I've talked too much about myself already, but we definitely have learned on the other side of our trauma to work in a way that's very complementary, because we are polar opposites. We have completely different gifts and strengths and weaknesses. And in the context of parenthood, we actually joke about it a lot, because we never lose it at the same time, which is very helpful. When I am on the verge, he steps in and calms it down, and vice versa, because we're such different people and we have such different tools. We have learned to really, really listen to each other, because even though we may not initially agree, inevitably, if we talk about it, we find that he's going this direction and I'm going this direction, but we always meet at the same point, because we share the same values and the same morals. So he has been an incredible influence on me, because he has completely shifted and broadened my perspective in a way that probably would not have been possible for anybody else. Because it's not just that I love him so much, but I also respect and admire him so much that I know if he's saying something, even if my initial instinct is to disagree, it is worth hearing him out, because I'm going to learn something. And I think he would say the same thing. So I feel truly, immeasurably grateful to have him as my partner, because nobody else has had a greater influence on me than he has.
I just love that. And I love seeing the two of you together, because I do feel, sorry, it's my turn to have a frog in my throat. I do feel that it is this beautiful balance to watch the pair of you together. And I feel blessed that I have had that opportunity to witness it in real life and real time. So what's next for you?
Oh boy, that's a good question, and a big and loaded one. Well, at the moment, historically, I've been working with several different nonprofits, which I plan to continue doing. But right now, we are in the process of creating our own nonprofit. We'd like to offer a more centralized healing solution to various groups of people. I am working on book number 2. I can't share details yet, but it is in the works, or there's a Word document, so it's happening. Right now, we're doing a lot of speaking engagements. I'm actually just having a wonderful time. I'm really enjoying the process of this book being out in the world, which I didn't necessarily expect. 20 years ago, if I had written a book, it would have been to check off some imaginary list of accomplishments to make me feel like I was worth something. And that's all it would have been about. But now, on the other side of dealing with the trauma that actually birthed this book, I feel completely differently. People would always ask me, oh, how does it feel to have written a book? And I didn't know what to say, because I wrote the book purely as an act of service, because this information needs to be known. People need to know that it is entirely possible to deal with your trauma in a permanent way and have the life that you really want. So it had nothing to do with ego for me by the time I actually got to write it. So as a result of that, when I get to go do something like give a talk or do a book signing or a reading, I get to connect with people in a very real, tangible way. And this happened at a signing of mine the other night. There were a couple of women in the audience who were struggling with relationships with their children. And they allowed themselves, or at least the energy of the event, allowed them to be really open and really vulnerable and ask these questions. And I was able to answer them in a way that, at least I hope, was powerfully helpful and truly empowering, and maybe a different perspective than you might hear from another source. And I would never have been able to do any of that without this experience. So right now, I'm really trying to enjoy being fully present and help as many people as I can, and also hear different perspectives and get to know as many people as I can. Because for me, the exchange of energy, like we're having right now, being with someone in a very real way, it's the best. I don't think it gets any better than that. And to me, this is exactly why we came. This is what being a human is all about. We have this incredible capacity for empathy and compassion and love. And that's exactly what it's going to take for us to fix this mess of a world that we've created.
Well, I want to say thank you for writing this book. Like I said, I felt like it was a gift. I couldn't put it down. And to really, truly get to our highest vibration, we need to go to the depths of our soul and do some of the darkest work that is imaginable. And to be so vulnerable and share that with everybody in terms of your journey, I am so grateful for. Thank you so much for writing it and sharing it. And we are actually going to have another discussion, you and I. You are going to be on the Golden Thread with myself, Dr. Ann Wilkie, and Tamara, who are all on High Vibe. And that is a show exclusive to High Vibe. And we're going to talk about some other elements of this book. And I cannot wait for that conversation.
Me either. I'm so looking forward to it. And thank you so much for having me. This has been wonderful. And I'm grateful for you and grateful to be here. Thank you.